Flicks by Bill Crenshaw. He knew it wasn't a question of if his beeper would go off. This time Devin Corley was home. His apartment, had just opened a beer, turned on the TV, stretched out on the couch. He phoned in. Dispatcher said Majestic Theatre, across town. He started the VCR, took a last pull at the beer, gave the cat fresh water, got a quick shower. Then he left. Speed was not of the essence. He knew what he'd find. A body. Ray Tasco, his partner, taking statements, popping his gum, looking amused and surprised at once. Maggie Epps with her wedge face and her black forensic kit, diagramming the scene, scooping nameless little forensic glops into baggies. Joe Franks in a safari shirt, slung with cameras, smiling like always smiling, always angry. He'd give Corley grief about being away from his desk again, or being late. Corley had been away from his desk a lot. He was always late. At the Majestic there were 2 uniforms in the men's john. The room was done in men's room tile, blue and white, smelled of urine, wet tobacco, stale drains, pine, trash can on side, brown paper towels spilling out, balled up, dark with water, some with red smears, floor around sinks wet, scattered splashes and small pools, hints of blood in wet footprints running back and forth across the tile. In near stall, somebody retching. The uniform watching the somebody was pointedly not looking at him. "What we got?" Corley asked the uniforms. "Got a slashing, Lieutenant," said the older uniform, 26 maybe, Lopez maybe. Corley glanced down at the name tag, Lopez. The younger uniform looked green at the gills. Corley didn't know him, knew he wouldn't be green long, not this kind of green. Lots of greens in homicide, green like green gills, green like a 2-day corpse, green like Corley, like old copper. "In here?" Corley asked. Lopez snapped his head back. "In the first theatre." Corley moved to the stall. Lopez moved beside him. Greengills went to the sink and splashed water on his face. "Who we got?" said Corley. "Pickpocket," he says. Says he just lifted the guy's wallet. Says he didn't know he was dead. The pickpocket turned around, face pasty, hair matted. "I didn't know, man," he said, whiny, rocking. "Jesus, I didn't know. That was blood, oh God, that was blood, man. And I didn't even feel it. My hands." He grabbed for the john again. Corley turned away. "Any of that blood his?" he asked. "Don't think so." The wallet was on the stainless steel shelf over the sinks. It was smeared with bloody fingerprints. Corley took out a silver pen and flipped the wallet open. "Find it in the trash can?" "Yes, sir," said the younger uniform, wiping the water from his face, looking at Corley in the mirror. "Money still in it? Credit cards?" "Yes, sir." The driver's license showed a 55-year-old business type, droopy eyes, saggy chin, looking above the camera, trying to decide if he should smile for this official picture. Bussy, Tyrone, Otis, Toccoa Falls, Georgia. The pickpocket told Corley that he'd seen this chubby dude asleep at the end of his row, which he'd seen him before with a big wad of cash in his wallet at the candy counter, and seen him put the wallet inside his coat and not in his pants. Near the end of the flick, when he got to the guy, he kind of tripped and caught himself on the guy's seat and said, "Sorry, excuse me," while lifting his wallet real neat, and he dropped the wallet into his popcorn box and headed right for the john to ditch the wallet and just stroll out with the plastic and the cash. But in the john his hands were bloody, and the guy's wallet and his shoes. And then he heard screaming in the lobby, and he ditched the wallet and tried to wash the blood off, but there was too much. The more he looked, the more he saw, and somebody came in and went out, so he tried to hide. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it was real bad. There was a spritzing noise, and thin, piney mist settled into the stall and spotted Corley's glasses. Corley tore off a little square of toilet paper and smeared the spots around on the lenses. He had the pickpocket arrested on robbery and on suspicion of murder, but he knew he wasn't the killer. "Victim here alone?" asked Corley. "As far as we know," said Lopez. "Convention, maybe. Is Tasco here? Do you know Sergeant Tasco?" Joe Franks leaned into the restroom, cameras swinging at his neck. "Hey, Corley, you in on this or not? The meat wagon's waiting. Come show me what you want." Corley smiled. "You know what I want." "Yeah, show me anyway, so if you don't get it all, you don't blame me. Where have you been?" "You shoot in here?" "Yeah, I shot in here." He sounded impatient. "You get the footprints?" "Yeah, I got the footprints." "Get the towels and the sink?" "Yeah, the towels, the sink and the stall, and the punk. And I even got a close-up of his puke, okay?" "See, Joe," said Corley, smiling again, "you know exactly what I want." "I hate working with you, Corley," said Franks, as Corley pushed past him. In the theatre, Maggie Epps was sitting on the aisle across from the body, sketchpad on her knees. "Glad you could make it, Devon," she said. Corley fished for a snappy comeback. Couldn't hook anything he hadn't said 100 times before, said hello. Franks showed Corley the angles he had shot. Corley asked for a couple more. The flashes illuminated the body like lightning, burned distorted images into Corley's retina. Tasco came in, talking to somebody, squinting over his notebook. "Ray, you got the manager there?" Corley called. "I'm the owner," the man said. "Think you could give us some more light?" "This is as bright as it gets, officer. This is a movie theatre." Corley turned back around. Franks snorted. Mr. T.O. Bussey sat on the aisle in the high-backed chair, sagging left, head forward, eyes opened. Blood covered everything from his tie on down, had run under the seats toward the screen. People had tracked it back toward the lobby, footprints growing fainter up the aisle. "You shoot that?" asked Corley. Franks nodded. "Probably thought they were walking through cola." Corley bent over Mr. Bussey. He put a hand on the forehead and raised the head an inch or two so that he could see the wound. "You see this?" "Yeah. Want a shot?" "Can I lift his head, Maggie?" "Just watch where you plant your big feet," she said. Corley stood behind Mr. Bussey, put his hands above the ears, and raised the head face forward, chin up. He turned his eyes away from the flashes. "What did he get?" said Corley. "Everything," said Maggie. "Jugular, carotid, trachea, carotid, jugular. Something real sharp. This guy never made a sound, never felt a thing. Maybe a hand on his hair jerking his head back. Nothing after that." "From behind?" Corley lowered the head back to where he had found it. "Left to right, curving up. You got your man in the John?" "Don't think so. Too much blood on his shoes. He walked out in front, not behind." "So what have you got?" "Headache." Maggie smiled. "It's going to get worse." Corley smiled back. "It always does." Corley made Greengills help bag the body. He could say that he was helping the kid get used to it, that it didn't get any better, that as bodies went, this one wasn't bad, but he wasn't sure he had done it as a favor. He was afraid he'd done it to be mean. They spent half an hour looking for the weapon. Corley didn't expect to find anything. They didn't. He had a videotape unit brought over and sent Lopez and Greengills into the other theatres to block the parking lot exits and send the audiences through the lobby. The owner pulled him aside and protested. Corley told him that the killer might be in another theatre. The owner said something about losing the last Death Dancer audience and not needing any publicity, hurting ticket sales, and being as much a victim as that poor man. "I own 9 screens in this town," he said, dragging his hand over his jaw. "I'm not responsible for this. Let's keep the profile low, okay?" There was nothing Corley could say, so he said nothing, and the owner bristled and said he had friends in this town. "I'll speak to your superior about this, officer." "Corley," he said, walking away. "That's Ley." The other movies ended and the audiences pushed into the lobby. Corley had them videotaped as they bunched and swayed toward the street. 2 more uniforms arrived, and he started them searching the other theatres for the weapon. He left Tasco in charge and went to the station and hung around the darkroom while Franks did his printing and bitched about wasting H-talent on corpses and about Corley's always wanting more shots and more prints than anybody else. Corley didn't bother to tell Franks again that it was his own fault, that Franks was the one who always waxed eloquent over his 3rd beer and said that the camera always lied, that the image distorted as much as it revealed, that photographs were fictions. He had convinced Corley, so Corley always wanted more and more pictures, each to balance others, to offer new angles, so that reality became a sort of compromise, an average. Corley didn't say any of that again. He made the right noises at the right times, like he did when Frank said how he was going to quit as soon as he finished putting his portfolio together, as soon as he got a show somewhere. Maybe Franks really was working on a project. Maybe he should be a real photographer. Corley didn't know. He knew Franks about as well as he could, down to a certain level, no further. He imagined that Franks knew him in about the same way. It wasn't the kind of thing they talked about. Corley lifted a dripping print out of the fixer. "Why'd you become a cop anyway?" he said. Franks took the print from him and put it back. It was hard to read Frank's eyes in the red light. "You're asking that like you thought there were real answers," Frank said. Corley took the prints to his desk and did what paperwork he could. He worked until the sky got grey. By the time he stopped for donuts on the way home, the first edition of the news was in the stands. It didn't have the murder. He thought sometimes there were real answers instead of just the same patterns and ways to deal with patterns and levels beyond which you couldn't go. He thought sometimes that there was a way to get to the next level. He thought sometimes he'd quit, do insurance fraud, something. He thought maybe he hated his job, but he didn't know that either. He had thought there was something essential about working homicide, essential in the sense of dealing with the essences of things, a job that butted as close to the raw edge of reality as he was likely to get, and how would he do insurance after that? But whatever kind of essence he was seeing, it was mute, images beyond articulation. None of it made any sense, and he was bone-marrow tired. The landing at his apartment was dim, and as he slid his key into the second lock, he could see the peephole darken in the apartment next door. 5:30 in the morning, and Janelli was already up and prowling. Corley stood an extra second in the rectangle of light from his apartment so that Janelli could see who he was, whoever the hell Janelli was, besides a name on a mailbox downstairs, an eye at the peephole, the sounds of pacing footsteps, of a TV. Corley's cat sniffed at the flecks of dried blood on his shoes. Corley tossed the paper and Franks's pictures on the desk, opened a can of smelly cat food, had a couple of donuts and some milk. Then he rewound the tape in the VCR and stretched out on the couch to watch the program that the call to the theatre had interrupted. It was a cop show. At the station they laughed at cop shows. Things made sense in cop shows. He fell asleep before the first commercial. Corley woke up with the cat in his face again. He got a hand under its middle and flicked it away, watched it twist in the air, land on all fours, sit and stretch, lick its paws. It wasn't even his cat. The apartment had come with the cat, and a wall of corky tile covered with pictures of the previous occupant. The super hadn't bothered to take them down. "Throw 'em away if you want," he'd said. "What do I care?" She was pale and blonde, an actress who never made it, maybe, a model, a photographer. Corley wondered what kind of person would leave a cat and a wall covered with her own image. He still had the pictures in a box somewhere. He used the cork as a dartboard to pin up grocery lists and phone numbers. After 8 months he was getting used to the cat, except when it tried to lie in his face, which it always did when he fell asleep on the couch. One of these times he was going to toss it out of the window, down to the street. 4 floors down, it didn't matter if it landed on its feet or not. He looked at his watch. Only 9:30, but he knew he wouldn't get back to sleep. He might as well go in. He stopped for donuts and coffee and the second edition. Big headline, horror, flick, horror. Blood flowed on the screen and in the aisles last night at the Majestic Theatre. Great copy, he thought. Great murder for the papers. Stupid murder in a stupid place. Not robbery, not a hit, not on some salesman from upstate Georgia. Tasco would say somebody boozed, whacked, dusted. Corley didn't think so. This one was weird. There was something going on here, something interesting. A new level, maybe. Something new. He sat for a long time thinking. It was going on 11 by the time he dropped the paper on his desk. "My kids love those things," said Tasco. "What things?" Tasco pointed to the headline. "Horror flicks." Corley looked at the paper. The story was covered in green felt tip pen with questions about the case, with ideas, with an almost unrecognizable sketch of the scene. Corley didn't remember doodling. There was a tapping of knuckle on glass. Captain Hupman motioned them into his office. "Finally," said Tasco. "How long you been waiting?" said Corley. "Too long." "Sorry." He knew the captain had been waiting on him, had made Tasco wait on him too. "Just go easy, okay?" Tasco said. The captain shut the door and turned to Corley. "So, where are we on this one?" Tasco looked at Corley. Corley shrugged. The captain started to snap something, but Tasco flipped open his notebook. "Family notified," he said. "Victim in town for sales convention. Goes to same convention every year. Never takes wife. Concession girl remembers him because he talked funny, had an accent she meant, and he made her put extra butter on his popcorn twice and called her mom. Nobody else remembers him. Staying at the plaza, single room, no roommate. They don't take roll at the meetings, so we don't know if he's been to any or if he's been seeing the sights." Tasco looked up, popping his gum, then looked at Corley. "I think we've got a nut," said Corley. "Random. Maybe a one-shot, maybe a serial." The captain raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Are we taking an interest in our work again?" Corley shifted his weight. "A nut," said the captain. "Ray?" Tasco shrugged. "Seems reasonable, but we're not married to it. Might be a user flipped out by the flick." The captain turned back to Corley. "Why did he pick Bussy?" Corley could picture Bussy at the convention, anonymous in the city and the crowd, free to cuss and stay out late if he wanted, hit the bars and the ladies, drink too much and smoke big cigars. But Mr. Bussy hadn't gone that far. He'd just gone to a movie he wouldn't be caught dead in at home. "He sat in the wrong place," said Corley. "He was on the aisle. Quick exit." "What quick exit? This is a theatre, for Christ's sake. This is public. You don't do a random in public." The captain drew his lips together. "Where do you want to go with this?" he asked finally, looking more at Tasco than Corley. Corley looked at Tasco before answering. He hadn't told Tasco anything. "We want to talk to the pickpocket again, the employees again. We've got some names from the audience. The paper had some more. We want them to see the tapes, see if they recognize somebody coming out of the other theatres. Ray wants to do more with Mr. Bussy's movements, see if there's some connection we don't know about." "Okay," said the captain. "You've both got plenty of other work, but you can keep this one warm for a couple of days. Check the gangs. Maybe something there. Initiation ritual. Something. If it's some kind of hit, or if it's a user, it won't go far." "I think it's a serial," said Corley. "You mean you hope it's a serial?" said the captain. "Otherwise you're not going to get him. That it?" "Yes, sir," said Tasco. "Oh, and Corley," the captain said as Corley was halfway through the door. "Welcome back. Back to stay?" They followed up with the employees and what members of the audience they could find, asked if they'd known anybody else in the theatre, seen anything unusual, remembered someone walking around near the end of the movie. They showed them pictures of the pickpocket and Mr. Bussey's driver's license, the tapes of the other audiences, asked if anybody looked familiar. Corley tried to make himself ask the questions as if they were new, as if he'd never even thought of them before. Same questions, same answers, and if you didn't listen because it all seemed the same, you missed something. Tasco always asked the questions right, and was somehow not dulled by the routine, by the everlasting sameness. Tasco hunkered down and did his job, would see the waste and the stupidity of it all, say, "Geez, why do they do that? We got to get the SOB that did this. Aren't people horrible?" Tasco's saving grace was that he didn't think about it. Corley didn't mean that in a mean way. It was a quality he envied, maybe even admired. Welcome back, back to stay. Sometimes he wondered why he didn't just walk away from it all. They got Maggie to draw a seating chart, and they put little pins in the squares, red for Mr. Bussey, yellow for the people they questioned, blue in seats that yellows remembered being occupied. The media played the story and boosted ratings and circulation, and more people from the audience came forward, and others who claimed to have been there but who Tasco said were probably on Mars at the time. The number of pins increased, but that was all. "They sat all around him," said Corley, "and they didn't see anything." "So who in this city ever sees anything?" "Yeah, well, they should have seen something. Maybe they were watching the movie. Maybe we should see it." They used their shields to get into the 7 o'clock show. The ticket girl told them that the crowd was down, especially in Death Dancer. Tasco bought a big tub of popcorn and 2 Cokes, and they sat in the middle about halfway to the screen. The horror flicks that had scared Corley as a kid played with the dark, the uncertain, the unknown, where you might not even see the killer clearly, where you were never sure if the clicking in the night outside was the antenna wire slapping in the wind or the sound of the giant crabs moving. One thing might be another, and there was no way to tell, and you never really knew if you were safe. But this wasn't the same. Here the only unknowns were when the next kid was going to get it and how gross it would be. A series of bright red brutalities, each more bizarre than the last, more grotesque, more unreal. Corley couldn't take it seriously, but maybe the audience could. Unless they were cops or medics, maybe this was what it was like. Corley started watching them. They were mostly under 40, sat in couples or groups, boys close to the screen or all the way to the wall and the corners, girls in the middle, turning their heads away and looking sideways, dates close, touching, copping feels, marrieds a married distance apart. They all talked and laughed too loud. On the screen the killer stalked the victim and the audience got quiet and focused on the movie. Corley could feel muscles stiffen, tension build as the sequence drew the moment out. The moment you knew would come, was coming, came, and they screamed at the killing, and after the killing sank back spent, then started laughing nervously, talking, wisecracking at the screen, at each other. Corley watched 3 boys sneak up behind a row of girls and grab at their throats, the girls shrieking, leaping, the boys collapsing in laughter. A girl chanted, "Esther wet her panties," and the whole audience broke up. On the screen the killer started stalking his next victim, and the cycle began again. "What do you think?" asked Corley, lighting a cigarette as soon as they hit the lobby. People in line for the next show stared at their faces, as if trying to see if they would be scared or bored or disgusted. Corley thought they all looked hopeful somehow. Tasco shrugged, placid as ever. It was a horror flick. Was it any good? "Who can tell? You'll have to ask my kids." The summer wind was warm and filled with exhaust fumes. "You want to come up for a beer or something?" Corley asked. Tasco looked at his watch. "Nah, better get back. Evelyn, see you tomorrow." Corley thought about rephrasing it, asking if he wanted to stop in for a beer somewhere, but Tasco had already made his excuse. Used to be they'd have a beer once or twice a week before Tasco started his 30-minute drive back to Evelyn and the kids and the postage stamp yard he was so proud of, but that was before Corley had moved across town, out of his decent apartment with the courtyard and the pool, into what he lived in now. Tasco had been to the new place once only. He'd looked around and popped his gum and looked surprised and amused, and inhaled his beer, and left. Corley was relieved that Tasco hadn't asked him why he'd moved. He asked himself the same thing. After he fed the cat, Corley put on the tape of the audience leaving the other screens. At first they ignored the camera, looked away, pretended not to see it, nudged a companion, pointed discreetly. Some made faces, and more people saw it, and more made faces or shot birds or mouthed, "Hi, Mom!" or walked straight at the camera so that their faces filled the pictures, stuck hands or popcorn boxes in front of the lens, waved, mugged, danced, pretended to strip, to moon the camera, to kiss Corley through the TV screen. They had taped 3 audiences. They acted about the same. Before he went to bed, Corley posted the newspaper articles and Franks's pictures on the cork wall, with a shot of Mr. Bussey in the centre. The heat woke him. He lay sweating, disoriented, fingers knotted in sheets. The nightlight threw a yellow oval on the wall opposite, gave the room a focus, showed him right where he was. He hated the panic that came from not being sure. He took 3 or 4 deep, slow breaths. He hadn't always had the nightlight. He hadn't always strapped an extra gun to his leg or carried 2 speed loaders in his coat pockets every time he went out. He hadn't always spent so much time in his apartment, in front of the TV, asleep in front of the TV, in bed. He tried not to think about it. He tried not to think. It was too early to be up, too late to go back to sleep, too hot to stay in the apartment. He could make coffee and go to the roof before the sun hit the tar, could catch the breeze off the river, let the cat stalk pigeons. While the coffee dripped, he sat on the couch and looked at the pictures on the wall. In the central picture, Mr. Bussey sat with head up and eyes open like he was watching the movie, the wound like a big smile. Death in black and white. Not like the deaths in the movie. Real was more something. Casual, anticlimactic, prosaic, unaccompanied by soundtrack. Maybe Bussey wasn't really dead. Maybe it was just special effects. In the picture, his hands held Mr. Bussey's head just above the ears. He wiped his palms on his shorts. Mr. Gianelli's peephole darkened as Corley shut his door and the cat slid up the stairs. He was halfway to the landing when the door opened the width of the chain, and Gianelli's face pressed into the crack, cheeks bulging around the wood. Over his shoulder a room was lit by a television's multicolored glow. "I know what you're doing, young man," Gianelli called in a rasping voice. "Sorry if I woke you," Corley said, kept climbing, smiled. Maybe 38 seemed young to Gianelli. "You leave my antenna alone," Gianelli said. "The one on the chimney. I've been 17 years in this building. I got rights. You hear me, young man? Next time my picture goes, I'm calling a cop." He slammed his door and it echoed in the stairwell like a gunshot. Corley beat Tasco to work. "Whoa," said Franks on his way to the coffee pot. "On time and everything. You must have figured it out." "Figured what out?" said Corley. Franks smiled. "That you won't get fired for being late. You want out, you got to quit." "So who wants out?" "Who doesn't?" Tasco had never said anything about Corley's being late. When Tasco came in, he didn't say anything about Corley's being early. Another homicide came in, and they spent the morning and most of the afternoon down by the river and the warehouses, Tasco and Corley and Maggie and Joe, and the smells of creosote and fish and gasoline. Some punk had taken a 12-gauge to the gut, sawed off, Maggie said, because of the spread and the powder burns. Another drug hit as the new champions of free enterprise tried to corner the market. It wasn't going to get solved unless somebody rolled over. A crowd gathered at the yellow police line ribbons. Lopez and Greengills came in for crowd control. The paramedics bitched about hauling corpses. Greengills didn't seem to be bothered by the body. It was late when they got back to the station. "I'm going to the movie," said Corley. "I'm going to take our pickpocket. Want to come?" "What for?" "Like you said, maybe something in the movie freaked this guy. Maybe we can find something." "I don't think we're going to get anywhere on this one." "So you want to come, or not?" Tasco said no. The pickpocket didn't want to go either. "My treat," Corley told him, not smiling. Corley sat in Mr. Bussey's seat and told the pickpocket to reconstruct exactly what he had done, when he had done it. He got popcorn and grape soda like Bussey, put the empties into the next seat like Bussey, concentrated on the movie, tried not to see the pickpocket in the corner of his eye, tried to ignore the feeling that his back was to the door, tried to control his breathing. He hated this, hated the dark, the people around him, the long empty aisle on his left. He felt full of energy demanding use, fought to sit still. Finally, on the screen, the killer reached for the last survivor, and the background music shrieked, and Corley slumped left and lowered his head and sat, and on the screen the girl fought off the killer, and they rescued her just in time, and they killed the killer and comforted the girl, and they discovered that the killer wasn't dead and had escaped, and then Corley felt the pickpocket fall across him, heard his sorry, felt the wallet slide out of his coat, only because he was waiting for it. He sat slumped over while the audience filed out, giggling or groaning or silent. He sat until a nervous usher shook him and asked him to wake up. He found the pickpocket throwing up in the men's room. "We're just going to leave this open for a while," said the captain. "Put the river thing on warm." Tasco nodded, popping his gum. Corley said nothing. "Problem, Devin? I'd like to stay on this a while." "Got something to sell? New leads? Anything?" Corley shook his head. "Not really." "Okay, then." They went back to their desks. "Learn anything last night?" asked Tasco. Corley shrugged, remembering the dark, palpable and pressing, the icy air pushing not his lungs as he sat and waited, the effort to exhale, trying to concentrate on the movie, on what might have snapped somebody. And after, trying to help the pickpocket out of the stall, embarrassed for him now, and sorry, and the pickpocket twisting his elbow out of Corley's grip and tearing in half the 20 that Corley had stuffed into his shirt pocket. Bloody money, maybe. Something. He wouldn't have it. "Not much," he said. "Bussey must have gotten it in that last sequence, like we thought." Funny, isn't it? All that stuff up there on the screen, and out in the audience, some dude flicks out a blade and that's that. "Yeah," said Corley. "That's that." Corley found himself at a movie again that night, a horror flick near the university. He sat on the aisle, last row, back to the wall. The movie looked the same as the other, felt the same rhythms, same victims, same bright gore. The audience was younger, more the age of the characters on the screen, and louder, maybe, but still much the same as the others, shouting at the screen, groaning, cracking jokes, laughing in the wrong places, trying to scare each other, strange responses, inappropriate somehow. They had come for the audience as much as the movie. They had come to be in a group. He found himself the next night in another movie, on the aisle, last row, back to the wall, fingering the speed loader in his pocket, trying to remember why he was wasting his time there. Near the end of the show, he saw a silhouette down front rise and edge toward the aisle, stop, and his guts iced as he saw it reach out its left hand and pull back someone's head, heard a scream, saw it slash across the throat with its right hand, and turn and run up the aisle for the exit, coming right for him, too perfect. He braced, tightening his grips on the armrests, fought to sit, as the silhouette ran toward him. Then he stuck out a leg, and the man went down hard, and Corley was on him with his knee in the back and his gun behind the right ear. He yelled for an ambulance, ordered the man to open his fist. The man was slow. Corley brought a gun butt down on the back of his hand. The fingers opened, and something bright rolled onto the carpet. Corley stared at it for a few seconds before he saw it was a tube of lipstick. "It's only a game, man," said a voice above him, quavering. Corley looked up. The owner of the voice was pointing with a shaking finger to the bright red lipstick slash along his throat. "Only a game." Corley cuffed them to each other and took them in. He was not gentle with them. The papers had fun with the story. "Off-duty Detective Nab's lipstick slasher," said one headline. Corley posted the stories on the corkboard. They gave him a hard time when he got to work, asked if he'd been wounded, if the stain would come out, warned him about the chapstick chopper. He didn't let it get to him. What got to him was how much fun the slasher and his victim had. He tried to tell Tasco about it. He'd almost lost it, he said. He'd been shaking with rage, wanted to push them around, run them in hard, give them a dose of the fear of God, but it didn't sink in. They just kept replaying it all the way into the station. "You really didn't know for sure, did you?" the slasher had asked. "Thought I was gone," said the victim. "For a second there I thought this was it." He laid his head back on the seat, his face suddenly blue, fading to black as the unit passed under a streetlight. "Oh, wow," he said. "Shut up," Corley had snarled. "Just shut the hell up." They had gone silent, then looked at each other and giggled. "Drugs," said Tasco. "They weren't looped. It was like they were, but they weren't. This guy, the victim, for all he knew it was the killer. He was scared shitless, Ray, and he loved it." Tasco shrugged. "It's a cheap high. Love that rush, maybe. Or maybe it's like they're in the flick. Make some movie stars. Everybody wants to be a movie star. Put a Walkman on your head, and your life's a fucking movie. I just wish I knew what the hell was going on." Corley rocked back in his chair. "I'm going to a movie tonight. Want to come?" Tasco stared at Corley for a second or two. "This on your own time?" "You want to come, or not?" "The river's on warm, remember. We're not going to get this one. It was a one-shot." He paused a second. "You okay?" Corley rocked forward. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It's not supposed to mean anything. I only wanted—" "All I did was ask if you wanted to go to a flick." "Keep your voice down. Jesus, for 6 months you've been a walking burnout. I've been like partnered with a zombie. I do my job. Nobody can say I don't do my job. Now suddenly you're doing overtime. I'm your partner. I just want to know if you're okay, that's all." "I'm fine," Corley snapped. "Okay, great. I'm just asking." Corley got up and crossed the squad room and refilled his coffee cup and sat back down. He took a sip, burned his tongue. "Yeah, well," he said, "thanks for asking. You want to come?" Tasco shook his head. "It's going to be a long day without that." It was a long day, but Corley made the 9 o'clock at the Majestic. The ticket girl let him in on his shield again, said the numbers were up, really up. The lobby was crowded, people too deep at the candy counter, clumped around video games, whooping over electronic explosions as someone blasted something on the screen. There were no seats left at the back or on the aisle, and Corley had to sit between 2 people. He kept his elbows off the armrests. During the movie, the audience seemed more tense, everybody wide-eyed and alert. but he caught himself with knotted muscles more than once and thought the tension maybe was in him. The lipstick game spread like bad news, and every night Corley ran in 1 or 2 slashes for questioning and for anger, because it wasn't a game when he saw a head snap back or heard a scream, wasn't a game when the man moving down his row or running up the aisle might have a razor tucked in his fist. The games got elaborate, became contests with teams, slashers and victims, alternating roles and tallying points in the lobby between shows. Sometimes someone would slash a stranger, and Corley broke up the fights at first, but later didn't bother, didn't waste time to risk injury for a pair of idiots. He went to movies every night that week, and every night he saw more people than the night before, and felt more alert and tense, and left more exhausted. His ulcer flared like sulphur. He was smoking again. On Friday night, near the end of the movie, his beeper went off, and half the audience screamed and jumped and clutched in their seats, then sank back as a wave of relief swept over them, and they gave themselves to laughter and curses and groans and chatter, ignoring the movie. Corley phoned in from the lobby. They had found a body after the last show at the Astro. He had been slashed. Corley was strangely pleased. "It could be some frigging copycat," said Tasco the next day, yawning. Corley wasn't sleepy. "No way," he said. "Exactly the same. The paper had the details. It's the same guy, Ray." Okay, said Tasco, palms up. Same guy. The routine began again. Interviews, hunting up the audience, blue and yellow pins, lack of a good witness. Tasco asked where they'd sat, what they'd seen, who they'd known. Corley asked them why they'd gone, whether they'd like it, if they went to horror flicks often, if they'd played the assassin games. They didn't know how to answer him. He made them uncomfortable, sometimes angry, and they addressed their answers to Tasco, who looked amused and popped his gum and wrote it all down. Corley posted the new pictures on the corkboard, and the articles and the editorials and the movie ads. Various groups blasted the lipstick game, called for theatres to quit showing horror movies, called for theatres to close completely. Corley's theatre owner wrote a guest editorial calling on readers not to be made prisoners by one maniac, not to give in to the creatures of the night. The Moviola ads promised armed guards. The Majestic dared people to come to the late show. The corkboard was covered by the end of the week, a vast montage filling the wall behind the blank television. Tasco went with him to the movies now. There were lines at every ticket window, longer lines every night. The Moviola's security guards roamed the lobby and aisles. The Majestic installed airport metal detectors at the door. The Astro frisked its patrons, who laughed nervously or cracked wise like Cagney or Bogart. And the guards made a big production when they found tubes of lipstick, asked if they had a license, were told it was for protection only, or that they were collectors or with the FBI. They were all having a great time. The ticket girl said they gave her the creeps. "That's 2 of us," Corley said. Corley and Tasco sat on opposite sides of the theatre, on the aisle, backs to the wall, linked with lapel mics and earphones. Fewer and fewer played the lipstick game, but the audiences seemed electric and intense. Corley felt sharp and coiled, felt he could see everything, felt he was waiting for something. After the movies, when he came home drained and sagged down on the couch, Corley found himself staring at the wall, at the picture of T.O. Bussey looking out at him from the aisle seat, his hands holding up the head, and he felt like he didn't know anything at all. Corley turned off his electric razor and turned up the radio. An early morning DJ was interviewing a psychiatrist about the slasher. Corley knew he'd give the standard wacko profile, a quiet, polite boy-next-door type who repressed sex and hated daddy, and that everybody who knew him would be surprised and say what a nice guy he was and how they could hardly believe it. He got his notebook to write it down so he could quote it to Tasco. Said he was quiet, withdrawn, suffers repressed sexuality and sexual expression, experiences intense emotional build-up, and achieves orgasm at climax of movie and murder, cycle of build-up and release, release of life, fluids, satisfaction. He flipped the notebook shut. "Geez, I hate that," said Tasco. "I hate the hell out of that. That doesn't mean squat. That's just words. Who is he? Gets paid to say crap like that. He doesn't know anything." "I want to talk to this guy," said Corley. "I just want to sit down and talk to him, you know. I just want to buy him a drink or something and ask him what the hell is going on." "You mean the shrink?" Tasco was squinting. "Our guy," said Corley. "The slasher." Tasco didn't say anything. "He knows something," said Corley. Tasco looked angry again. "He doesn't know anything. What are you talking about?" Corley tried to say what he meant, couldn't find it, couldn't make it concrete. Why was it so important to get this guy, see him, find out what he looked like, why he did it? Not why exactly, but how. Maybe how, in the sense of giving people a chance to maybe have their throats cut and having them line up like it was a raffle. What would that tell him about what was driving him off the street, what kept drawing him back down, why he was carrying an extra piece? What kept him in that lousy apartment in the middle of all of this tar and pavement when he could just walk away? What did he want? "He knows something about people," Corley said finally. Tasco waved his hand like he was fanning flies. "What could he know? He's just a sicko." "Come on, Ray. We've seen sickos. They don't slash in public. Not like this." Anger was in both voices now. Maybe they do. Maybe he just wanted to see if he could. Ever think of that? Maybe it's the thrill of offing somebody in front of a live audience. Maybe that's all. Yeah, that's all. And all those people out there know he's out there too, and they can't stay away. Why can't they stay away, Tasco? "We can't just keep going to movies, Devin. We got lives, you know." "We're not going to get him unless we get him in the act." "That's just stupid. That won't happen. That's a stupid thing to say." "Watch it, Sergeant." "Oh, kiss it, Corley. Jesus!" They were silent again, avoiding each other's eyes. "I just want to bust this guy," said Corley. "Yeah, well," said Tasco, looking out of the window, "what I want is to go home, see my wife and kids, maybe watch a ball game." He looked back to Corley. "So, we going out again tonight, or what?" They went again that night, and the next night, and the next. They always sat on the aisle at opposite ends of the last row so that they could cover both rear exits. Tasco would sit through only one show. Corley sat through both. He felt better when Tasco was at the other end, when he could hear him clear his throat, or mutter something to himself, or even snore when he nodded off as he sometimes did, which amazed Corley. Corley stayed braced in his seat. When Tasco left, Corley felt naked on the aisle, so he'd move in one seat and drape a raincoat across the aisle seat so it looked occupied, so no one would sit there. The 9 o'clock show was usually a sellout. The audience filling every seat and pressing in on him, a single vague mass in the dark at a horror flick, hiding a man with a razor, maybe even inviting him, desiring him, seeking him. After 5 nights, Corley was ragged and jumpy. "I'm going to sit in the projection booth," he told Tasco. "Better view." Tasco shrugged. "End of the week and that's it, okay?" "We'll see." "That's got to be it, Devon." The booth gave Corley a broader view and gave him distance, height, a thick glass wall. At first he felt conspicuous whenever a pale face lifted his way as the audience waited for the movie to start. The manager showed him how to override the automatics and turn up the house lights, otherwise hands off. The projector looked like a giant Tommy gun sighted on the screen through a little rectangle, outlined on the glass in masking tape. He had expected something more sophisticated. Tasco was just out of sight below him. left aisle, last row, back to the wall. Through his earphone, Corley could hear the audience from Tasco's lapel mic. A general murmur, a burst of high-pitched laughter, the crying of a baby who shouldn't even be there. Corley wiped his glasses on his tie. Hundreds of people out there. Could be any one of them. And what the hell were the rest of them doing out there? And what the hell was he doing up here? The lights dimmed and the projector lit up. Commercials, previews, the main feature. A little out-of-focus movie danced in the rectangle on the glass, blobs of color and movement bleeding out onto the masking tape. The soundtrack was thin and tinny from the booth speaker, and just half a beat behind in the earphone, disconcerting. Beyond the glass, on exhibition, the audience stirred and rippled. Beyond them, the huge and distorted images filled the screen. He watched, and when someone stood and moved toward the aisle, he warned Tasco and felt adrenaline heat arms and legs, and the figure reached the aisle and turned and walked toward restroom or candy counter, and Corley tried to relax again. It was easier to relax up here, above it all. The movie dragged on. Corley found by staring at a central point in the audience and unfocusing his eyes, he could see all movement instantly, and everybody was moving, scratching ears and noses and scalps, lifting hands to mouths to cover coughs or to feed, rocking, putting arms around dates, leaning forward, leaning back, covering eyes with fingers. Again he saw the patterns emerge around the on-screen killings, movements ebbing as the killing neared, freezing at the death itself, melting after, and flowing across the audience again, strong and choppy, then quieter and smooth. He had to concentrate, breathe slowly and carefully, to keep himself from narrowing his vision, focusing on one person. He didn't see the movie. A flicker in the corner of his eye, flick of light on steel. He swung eyes right, locked on movement, saw the head pulled back, the blade flicker again, realized it was happening, that he hadn't seen the killer move down the row because he was sitting right behind his victim. It was happening now, all the way across the theater from Tasco. He radioed Tasco as he turned for the stairs and punched the lights, heard Tasco yell for the man to stop, knew they were too late for the victim, but they had him now. They had him now. They had him now. He took the stairs 3 at a time, slipped, skidded down, arms failing, wrenched his shoulder as he tried to break the fall. Then on his feet and bursting through the door behind the concession stand, drawing his pistol as he ran, putting out his left arm and vaulting over the counter, popcorn and patron flying. He stopped in front of the double doors, pistol leveled, waiting for the maniac to run into his arms. Nobody came. Corley crouched, frozen, pistol extended in 2 hands, and in his left ear the theater, voices and screams and music, and Tasco maybe, Tasco shouting something, and still nobody came. He moved forward, gun still extended, and jerked open a door with his left hand. Lights still brightening, movie running, and the screams and shouts and music in the earphone echoed in his right ear, and for an instant he lost where he was. Then he heard Tasco calling him in his earphone and saw him trying to hammer his way into a knot of people below the screen, the rest of the audience in their seats, watching the movie, or those down front attacking the slasher. Corley ran down the aisle, yelling for Tasco. The earphone went dead, and Tasco was gone. Corley reached the mass, started pulling people out of his way, stepping on them, pushing. Some pushed back and turned on him, and he knocked one down, and another man grabbed him, and he hit the man in the face, and backed toward the wall, gun leveled. The man changed his mind, backed away. Corley called Tasco, heard nothing through the earphone. He tried to elbow his way in the crowd, started clubbing with both hands around the pistol, fighting the urge to just start pulling the trigger and have done with it. A huge man turned and started to swing. Corley watched the fist come around in slow motion, easily deflected the blow, put a knee in the solar plexus, watched the man fall like a great tree, cuffed him across the jaw as he went down, felt that he could count the pores in the potato nose. They were right beneath the speakers, the music pounding his bones. He reached for the next one in his way. He heard a shot, saw Tasco cornered by 4 or 5, his gun pointed toward the ceiling but lowering. The next one wouldn't be a warning shot, and those guys knew it, and they weren't backing off. Corley tried to shout above the music, raised his pistol and fired toward the ceiling. Fired again, heard Tasco's gun answer, fired a third time, and the crowd started breaking at the edges. Some hurt, some bloody. Corley tried to hold them back, grabbed at one who twisted away, and they pushed past, ignoring him, laughing or shouting, and the others were leaving their seats now, mixing with them, and some in their seats were applauding and cheering. There were people lying all around them, some groaning, some bleeding. The slasher's victim sprawled across an aisle seat, throat open to the stars painted on the ceiling. "Help me, Jesus!" someone was saying over and over. "Jesus, help me!" He heard someone calling his name, saying something. It was Tasco. "I couldn't stop them," Tasco was saying. Corley looked down. They had used the slasher's blade and whatever else was handy. The slasher's features were unrecognizable, the head almost severed from the body. A sudden fury flashed through Corley, and he kicked the person lying nearest to him. "Couldn't stop them," Tasco repeated, his voice trembling. "Is this him, do you think?" asked Corley. Tasco didn't say anything. "Maybe Maggie can tell us," said Corley. "Maybe the ME." He could hear the desperation in his voice. "It could be anybody," said Tasco. When he used the phone in the ticket office to call it all in, he heard people demanding a refund because they hadn't gotten to see the end of the movie. Corley didn't get home until late the next afternoon. He'd made it through the last 18 hours by thinking about the crummy little apartment high above the street, with the couch and the double locks and the television. He heard the cat yowling before he even put the key in the first lock. He fed the cat and opened a beer and turned on his television, but the pictures were wrong, fuzzy, filled with snow. He tried to fix the image, but nothing worked, and he grew angry. Finally, he checked the roof and found his antenna bent over. "Gianelli!" he shouted, pounding, standing to one side of the door, seeing an image of Gianelli spinning in slow motion toward pavement 4 floors down. "Come out of there, Gianelli!" No answer. He spread the name out, kicking on the door once for each syllable. G-I-A-Nel-L. "You go away now," came a voice from inside. "You go away. I'm calling the cops." "I am a cop," Corley shouted, dragging out his shield and holding it to the peephole. "You go away now," Gianelli said after a moment of silence. Corley gave the door one last kick. He tried to salvage the antenna, but Gianelli had done a job on it, twisting the crosspieces, cutting the wires into a dozen pieces. Before he went to sleep, he took down the pictures and clippings about Mr. Bussey, and he dug around until he found the pictures of the previous occupant, and he pinned them all up. He crossed the room and sat on the couch to look at them. They were all black and white, blonde and pale eyes, and he wondered if she had walked away from whatever brought her here. He thought she was very beautiful, but who could tell from pictures? He locked the doors and put on the nightlight.